what we're going to attempt to do is we're going to explain how Britain's colonial policies contributed to the growth of self-government in the colonies. Yesterday, we talked about 3 different types of colonies that were under British control while right before we broke away from them in the Revolutionary War. Do you guys remember the name of them? You had a royal. Remember a royal colony? We done this yesterday, correct? Then we done proprietary, and then we done a charter one, right? Of those 3 types of colonies, which one had the most freedoms?
My brain just went blank, bro.
You got a 33% chance to guess right. What do you think?
What was the choices again?
Charter, proprietary, or royal?
Proprietary.
There we go.
Oh, the charter?
The charter. The charter one is the one that has the most freedoms. If you guys remember, in a royal colony, who ran things? The king appointed somebody. Who did he appoint? He appointed a governor. The governor had a bicameral legislature, right? That basically was appointed by them, and then he had to approve all laws. So in a royal colony, there was not a lot of freedom, okay? Same way in a proprietary colony. A proprietor, who's a person who owns quite a bit of land, was granted that land by the king. The proprietor then got to choose the governor, and then the governor had a bicameral legislature. Now, I told you guys yesterday, of all 13 colonies, all of them has a bicameral legislature except which one? Y'all remember?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania had a unicameral one, right? It just happened to be a proprietary colony. But that's what we went through. So that's kind of where we're at. We talked about 3 documents yesterday that influenced the writing of the Constitution. Do y'all remember those?
And the what? What's the question again?
Y'all killing me. Y'all don't. The Magna Carta, right? What did the Magna Carta give us? Trial by jury. What is your legal rights called? Due process. And it also said that, what was it? The king, there's something else it could do, and I drew a blank. But the due process and trial by jury were the biggest ones. Then you had the English Petition of Right. You guys remember what it did? Made the king ask for what to tax? He had to get what from Parliament to tax? Permission. He had to get consent, right? They also talked about how the king couldn't imprison people without just cause. So basically, our 8th Amendment. You're not subject to cruel and unusual punishment. And then it also created the 3rd Amendment, where you don't have to house soldiers during peacetime. Is all that ringing a bell? Y'all remember talking about that yesterday? And then the last one, the English Bill of Rights, English Bill of Rights. It gave us, due process, trial by jury, and all that, but it also created something that was very important. Create a system of what? Checks and balances, because it said in 1689 that they didn't want the king to abuse power. So we kept that idea, and we created our branches equally in order for no one to be able to abuse their power. Sounds like you guys need to study this stuff, because y'all going to have a quiz showing up in your virtual class like tomorrow or Thursday about section 1 and 2. All right? You got the one for section 2 due tomorrow. So the one on Thursday is going to encompass all this. You guys got me? So let's make sure we are understanding it, okay? So back to today. We're going to explain how Britain's colonial policies contributed to the growth of self-government in the colonies. Basically, we're going to talk about how we started separating ourselves from Britain and what they were doing that we didn't like, and vice versa. Okay? We're going to talk about the steps that led to growing feeling of colonial unity. You're going to see for the first time the 13 colonies kind of come together and form an alliance or a confederacy. You guys remember talking about a confederacy?
Yes.
We're going to talk about the First and Second Continental Congresses and what happened at those. Talk a little bit about the Declaration of Independence, and then we're going to summarize the common features of the first state constitutions. Hopefully we get to that point today. All right? So, without further ado, you guys have this sheet of paper, I hope, in front of you. I'm going to try to show it to you now. Or actually, you have it on your book, okay? If I were you guys, as we go through these notes, I would just jot down the year and then what was significant. We're not going to write all these. Does that make sense? There's no sense in putting all of them down. We're just going to do the ones that you need to know. Okay?
Can you open with and type in?
That's the one.
I
Like
think
you did yesterday. Can you open with?
Yeah.
Caleb has a way of figuring out how to write on PDFs because he sends me stuff. How do you do it?
Okay, it's a little extension for Google.
Yeah.
Okay.
K-A-M-I.
Kami, gotcha.
Yeah,
You
you
gotta
can
download
add
it.
that to your Google and then use that.
Y'all know how to do
open
that?
Up with Kami.
Yeah, well, it'll either give you the option for open with and then that, or it's a little blue button next to it.
Oh, with the K in it.
K what? K-A?
M-I.
You write that on the board. Okay.
Chrome extension.
It's an extension for Chrome. Y'all see it? And then you can write on your notes on the computer and you don't have to write it down. Thank you, Caleb.
You man.
Will you write down an extension on the side of it? Because the kids will know what I'm talking about. I don't.
When you look it up, it'll say Chrome extension.
Like you gotta go.
Like I literally don't even know how to look it up. So
You just look it up on Google.
Yeah.
I
You
mean,
can go in like Google Store and like find
Well,
it or
no, you can just literally type it in, and then it'll take you to your
Okay.
Chrome web store. And
Yeah.
it says I've already did it. And
Cool.
It says PDF document.
has everybody got it downloaded and we'll get started?
Chrome.
Now that he says that, I had that in a technology class last
So
week.
Miss Odie sent me a text message or an email 2 weeks ago with it and I deleted it. I was like, I think she meant to send it to somebody else.
That's all right.
Thank you, Caleb.
Yes.
Because he sent me something the other day and like had it on the test. He had things marked out and wrote, and I'm like, this is impressive. So this dude is really smart.
Caleb, you want to teach this class?
Now we good.
He's like, wait a minute.
Hey, I've got
I'm
all
not
the
trying to
notes
get
right
people
here.
expecting that much out of him. Zane's mask. All right, so let's go ahead and get started, and we'll kind of catch up. There's some couple of key terms on this at the bottom of the paper. If you guys will notice it, okay. You've got the word delegate, you got the words confederation, and you got the word repel. All right. You guys should already have an idea of what confederation means. Is everybody ready where they can type it? Good to go?
So which one are we starting on? We're starting on
We're going to start on number 17.
Federation.
Yeah, we're going to kind of jump back and forth with this.
I'll be right back.
Okay. We good to go?
You.
Good, Titus? All right, so at the bottom in number 17, you have the word confederation. When we talked about the different forms of government the other day, I told you guys that a confederation was a loose alliance of states that are kind of joined together simply because they're just together. They don't really interact with one another other than like maybe defense or things of that nature, but they really kind of own their own. So for our purposes, in your book it says it's a joining of several different groups for a common purpose. And that's what I put down. I would just put down different groups for a common purpose. Different groups for a common purpose come together. And that's for confederation. Yeah, that's number 17 in your notes. They come together for a common purpose. Okay? The Albany plan we're going to talk a little bit about here in a few moments. Okay? A delegate, guys, very simple. That's number 16 down there. A delegate is just a representative. We sent delegates to the Constitutional Conventions and the Continental Congresses and things of that nature, and they represented us. They represented the state's best interest. Okay, so delegates is just another thing of representatives. Cool fact here: if you keep this in your brain, it'll make sense later. Don't we have a House of Representatives at the national level in Congress? At the state level at Virginia, in our General Assembly, we have the Senate and the House of Delegates. Y'all got me? Same concept, just different names. All right. Then popular sovereignty. You guys learned what sovereignty was. It's not down there. I just want to touch base on it for a second. It says it's the principle that the government exists only with the consent of the governed. Who has absolute power when it comes to our government? The people. We make up the population, right? So popular sovereignty is just basically extending that we are the ones that are in charge. Okay? So, basically, guys, what we're going to go through here today on the paper that you have, we're going to start at number 3. Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't do the word repel, did we? At the bottom.
Repel or repeal?
Repeal, whatever you want to talk about. Repeal means simply to recall. We're going to remove, okay? And that's the last definition as far as that goes. All right?
What do you want to put down for it? Going to remove?
Recall, remove. We don't have it anymore. That's what repel means. Or repeal, as you would say.
So to recall.
Yeah, to remove it, either way. All right, is everybody straight on the...
All that,
Which part?
the, you just explained, repeal.
Yeah, the very bottom one, number 18 down there, where it says repeal, it just means to recall or to remove. They're taking it away. If they repeal it, they're not going to use it. And they repeal things when it comes to ideas for the Constitution. That's what we're eventually going to get to.
So for delegates, we only put down like
Representatives, yeah. Very simple stuff. Okay? So is everybody with me thus far? Does that make sense? All right. So, at the top of your paper, you've got that graph, right? I'm hoping, and I've obviously never done it this way before, but we're going to add a lot of stuff to a couple of these blanks that you have up here. Okay? So as we're writing in them, hopefully it'll just keep making the box bigger. Does that make sense? But if it don't, we need to figure out another way to get some of this stuff down. All right? Now, we can actually skip number 1 and number 2. We'll mark completely through them. We don't need what happened in 1643, and we do not need what happened in 1696. So those are irrelevant. All right? The first one we're going to talk about is 1754, and that actually brings us to one of the definitions that we didn't mention a second ago. Okay? So beside of 1754, I would like for you to write down the Albany Plan is proposed. And I have it on the board. Okay? So the Albany Plan is proposed. Now, we've kind of got to understand what the Albany Plan is made of. So this is what we're going to continue to add to this. All right, now you got to think, in 1754, we're about roughly 20 or so years away from gaining our independence from Great Britain, right? But we're still living in it, and we're still living under British control, and it's starting to get to the point to where we don't like what's going on. We're in the 13 colonies, and we got a guy by the name of Ben Franklin who proposes an idea to do a couple of things that is significant. All right? So, beside of Albany Plan, I need you to know whose plan it was. So jot down Ben Franklin. Okay, this was his, to this point in time, claim to fame. Okay? So, Ben Franklin proposes the Albany Plan, and he suggests 3 to 4 ideas, okay? And I'm just going to number them, is how I would put this in here. The first one that he wants is he wants us to form a Congress.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Hey.
I feel a restroom thing. Can I do
Yeah.
this?
Yeah. He wants the colonies to form a Congress. What's he trying to get the colonies to do? He's trying to get them to unite against the British Crown. Does that make sense? In 1754, the states or the colonies were just simply not ready to do that. So the first thing his idea suggests is we form a Congress. Okay? Now, once this Congress gets formed, he suggests 3 ideas. The second thing he wants, and it's all up on the board, he wants to make raise armed forces. So he wants to create a military. Does it go into the other one?
So,
The second idea of the Albany plan is to create a military. Okay? The third thing he wants to happen is he wants to regulate trade. He wants to have some type of plan amongst the states and between the colonies and other countries about trade. Because you guys got to think, at this point in time, every state is independent of one another. They're kind of just doing what they want to do. You got me? So each one of them have their own idea on trade. So he's trying to set a uniform stance on this is how we should regulate trade. And then lastly, he wanted a plan to deal with Native Americans. Okay? He wanted to have some type of idea to deal with Native Americans. Now, you guys are intelligent people. You guys know that we didn't form a Congress till after the U.S. Constitution was written. Well, I lie. We had some sort of a Congress under the Articles of Confederation, but it was unicameral, so it really didn't do a whole lot. So do you think Ben Franklin's idea of the Albany Plan stuck? Do you think this was approved in the states? No. The reason being is that each state has more power than the national government at this point. They're kind of doing what they want to do. Okay? We're under British control, but the guy that's controlling us is 3,000 miles away. So why would we come together when we're getting to do what we want to? Does that make sense? So, last thing underneath that, put down the plan was rejected. The plan was rejected. Now, there's a reason we wrote all that down, and when we get to it throughout this, it'll make sense. Okay? So just keep in mind, Ben Franklin in 1754 proposed the Albany Plan, which suggested that we create a Congress to make a military, regulate trade, and have an idea to deal with the Native Americans. Y'all with me? All right. So, moving forward, let's talk about some of the ideas that led to American independence. Now, we don't need to jot any of this down. You just need to hear me because you've already heard this 1,000 times. It says unpopular British colonial policies. Do you guys remember some of the policies that that Britain and England was putting on us while we were in the colonies that we started to dislike?
taxes.
A lot of it had to deal with taxes. The Stamp Act being one, Tea Act, the Intolerable Acts, you name it, they basically taxed everything, right? Obviously, we didn't like that. The reason we didn't like that is because we didn't have any representation in Parliament. Okay? It wasn't the fact that we was having to pay a tax, it was the fact that we didn't have a say-so on what taxes were being passed. Does that make sense? So that we grew angry with that. The second one, it says growing political unity among the colonies. We didn't like the fact that there's British soldiers everywhere in the colonies. So we start kind of come together and be like, listen, we need to move these people out. Okay? We start coming together again and protesting English policies. We was like, listen, we're not going to pay this stuff. We're not going to do these things you want us to do. This is a problem. All right? So, and then obviously, you have the Boston Tea Party, you have the Boston Massacre, when you have fighting amongst the soldiers and the colonists. So, you know, at this point in time, the colonies are at a boiling point. You know, we're not a big fan of how we're being treated, and England's not a big fan of us not submitting to what they want us to do, because you got to remember, Great Britain and England at this point in time has the best military in the world. Okay? And they're like, they've been pushing through and taking over things for a long time, and they're just thinking we're going to do the same thing in the colonies. All right? So, it says British colonial policies, and that brings us, I think, to number 4, where it says 1765. Write down the word Stamp Act. Okay? Write down the word Stamp Act. Now, do any of you guys remember from previous history classes what the Stamp Act is?
Like a tax on papers.
It's a tax. And it's a tax that says that you have to buy a stamp, basically, for any legal documents or newspapers. I would jot that down. You have to buy a stamp for any legal documents or newspapers. Now, at this point in colonial life, guys, the only way that people can keep up with what's going on in the world is by reading what? a newspaper. So what the Crown is saying is that we're going to have to pay a tax on every time we buy a paper. Any type of legal document, land deeds, marriage licenses, property tax, anything that has to deal with a document, they're going to tax us on. All right? So we're not a big fan of this idea. Okay? Now we're still in the same box. Okay? So what do you think the colonies do, or colonists do, to try to persuade the Crown to get rid of the Stamp Act? Do you guys know what we created? We create the Stamp Act Congress. That needs to go down underneath this. So in response to the Stamp Act, the colonists create the Stamp Act Congress.
So for a Stamp Act, you wanted us to put down the side of it because
It was a tax on legal documents or newspapers. Okay? Obviously, we don't like that. And when I say we, I'm talking about the colonists. You with me? Now, so we create the Stamp Act Congress. Now, what do you think we create this for? What's the main objective here? Okay? The main objective of the Stamp Act Congress is that we want the Crown to understand that we don't like paying this tax. So if you look at the notes on the board, it says that 9 colonies responded by forming the Stamp Act Congress in New York. You will see that question. Where did the Stamp Act take place? You need to know that it happened where? In New York, okay? So we sent 9 colonies were represented. It says that the first thing they done was they sent a declaration of rights and grievances to the king. This was the first unified colonial protest. Now this is the important part of what we're getting at with the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act, guys, is the first time in history that the 13 colonies have come together to try to do something for all of them. They are united. You guys understand that? So, under Stamp Act Congress, the first thing you need to jot down is that they sent a list of grievances or complaints, a list of complaints to the king. Okay? So we literally write a list of, we write a bunch of complaints down and say we'll send them to the man in charge across 3,000 miles away. Okay? And basically it was naming all the things we didn't like. How we didn't have representation in Parliament, how we had, basically we were a occupied cities because of all the British soldiers being around. We didn't want to pay all these taxes. Okay? So, this was the, and I put a star beside this, first unified colonial protest. First unified colonial protest. First time we've came together in history. Okay? Now, if you notice in the last step down there underneath Stamp Act, it says, what did Parliament do to the Stamp Act? They repealed it. What did I tell you repealed meant? They removed it. So put down that Parliament removes the Stamp Act. So let's recap this to make sure you understand it. So the Crown sends a tax down on the colonies that says that you're going to pay a legal, or you're going to pay a tax on any legal document or paper you buy, right? The colonists, in response to that, create a Congress where 9 colonies send a delegate to talk about how can we remove some of the things that we're doing. The idea that we came up with is that we will send a list of grievances to the king and see what happens. Once Parliament got this list, they noticed that we're unified, and Parliament does what to the Stamp Act? They get rid of it. As a colonist, would you feel like you've accomplished something there? Yeah. We fought the establishment, so to speak. We went up against the king, and we went up against the Parliament, and we won. Is everybody with me? So, do you think the king is going to be happy about this idea? You think the king's going to like the fact that Parliament repealed the Stamp Act?
no.
No, he's not. So, let's fast forward
1970.
to March 5th of 1770. So, once the Stamp Act gets repealed, what does the king do? He starts taxing everything else. You guys with me? So, once he starts doing that, it says new laws continue to anger colonists. They respond with boycotts and violence. Okay, we're not paying it. We're not going to buy English goods. We don't want anything to do with you. You guys understand that? So, it says events like the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party raise a lot of tension. You guys got to think. They're putting more taxes on us after we get one repealed, so everybody's unhappy. This is a very negative environment in the colonies at this point in time. So, on March the 5th, in 1770, in your notes, write down the Boston Massacre happens. The Boston Massacre.
For 1770.
That is number 5. The Boston Massacre. Y'all with me there?
Should we put in like a 4?
No, just simply the Boston Massacre. And what I'm getting at with that is this is where the tension is growing between the colonists and the soldiers. Okay, you gotta remember there's about 1 British soldier for every 5 colonists right now in the colonies. So there's a ton of soldiers. We're an occupied nation. Great Britain has basically occupied the colonies. Okay, so the Boston Massacre happens. Basically, some guys get in an argument with the British soldiers. Do any of you know how many people died at the Boston Massacre? It was 5, I believe. So I mean, when you say massacre, you think of must have been a big number, right? Massive amount of people got killed, but that wasn't the fact. Only about 5 got killed. But the way that the colonial newspapers portrayed what happened, all these colonists weren't armed. Does that make sense? They didn't have any type of weapons or things of that nature. And all of a sudden, the redcoats fire up on people that they're supposedly supposed to be protecting. So they literally shoot people that are unarmed. So you can only imagine the kind of uproar that that's going to create through the colonies. Does that make sense? All right. So we're going to fast forward to about, actually we're going to skip number 6. We don't need that one for test purposes. But it's talking about the committee of correspondence up there. Basically, that was kind of a group of people who came together to try to repeal these other laws and taxes and things, but I don't ask you any questions about it. Drop down to number 7. On December 16th in 1773, we're actually 2 years away from the Revolutionary War. What do you think happens there? There was a ship in Boston that had a cargo on it that we threw overboard. What do you think that was? The Boston Tea Party. So just jot down to number 7, the Boston Tea Party. So you guys know how much money was, actually how much tea that we threw overboard, how much profit we destroyed?
Millions.
In today's money, it's over $1 million. So obviously you'd be pretty upset in that situation. Okay? So, obviously, I can't stress enough the tension that we're having between the British soldiers and the colonial people. Okay? Now, number 8 is a significant one. Put down the Intolerable Acts. The Intolerable Acts. Now, does anybody in here know what the Intolerable Acts were?
They were intolerable.
Well, obviously, the Intolerable, yeah. You guys, the Intolerable Acts were basically a bunch of other taxes or laws passed by the British Parliament after the Boston Tea Party. Okay, they were meant to punish Boston for their defiance in the Tea Party. Okay, so basically these laws are supposed to punish the people that were supposedly responsible for what happened in the Boston Tea Party. Okay, so these Intolerable Acts are passed. All right, so here's where things get interesting. It's all these new laws. So if you'll drop down in number 9, if you see on the board, I've got the First Continental Congress. You guys see that? Write down the First Continental Congress, and we're going to add a bit to that. Okay? Yeah, this is number 9, September 5th, 1774. You have the First Continental Congress.
First Continental Congress.
The First Continental Congress. If I'm naming it the first, it's probably going to be a second one too, right?
Yeah.
So you have the First Continental Congress. All right. Now, the first thing I need you to know about the First Continental Congress, put down that they convened in response to the Intolerable Acts. Okay, so they came together, jot that down, as a response of the Intolerable Acts.
What number is this one?
No, this is still number 9. We're going to be filling in a bunch of stuff for number 9. Okay,
What was the first one you said?
the First Continental Congress.
What
And
the
it was a
second?
response of we came together because of the Intolerable Acts. We're going to try to get the king to get rid of the Intolerable Acts. Now, guys, let's rewind a little bit. When the Stamp Act came out in the colonies, and we created the Stamp Act Congress, we sent a list of grievances to England, right, saying what we didn't like. In response to us doing that, what did Parliament do to the Stamp Act? They got rid of it. They repealed it, right? So, let's fast forward now to 1774. The king or Parliament just put down new laws to try to punish the people for the Boston Tea Party. We create a Congress. What do you think we're about to send the king? A list of what? Grievances. And in our brain, we're thinking, what are they going to do? Oh, they'll get rid of them. They done it with the Stamp Act. Why won't they do it with this, right? So, they came together in response of the Intolerable Acts, and it had delegates from basically everywhere. Okay, now if you notice, it says it sent a declaration to who?
King.
The king. So, put it down. Sent a list of grievances or complaints. Still number 9.
A little important here.
We sent a list of complaints to King George. Now here's the significance. Old King George King George was not around when the Stamp Act got threw out. Y'all with me? King George gets this list of complaints about what Britain's colonial policies are, and he says he don't care. We're going to pay him. You're going to fix what you screwed up, basically. Okay. So the list of complaints to King George fails. Okay. So our next idea, if you'll notice up there, it says that the First Continental Congress urges colonists to boycott trade with England. If we boycott trade with England, is England going to be able to get everything they want? No, they're not. So, second thing, put down, you guys know what boycott means, right? Like just simply not have anything to do with. So put down that we boycott trade with England. Now, by boycotting trade with England, all that's going to do is make them mad because, guys, England is everywhere in the colonies right now. They're taking the timber we have and making their ships. You guys know what the number one crop was in the colonies at one point in time? Tobacco. What does tobacco do? It's addictive, right? Well, it's flourishing in England because everybody wants it, right? Well, we're stopping. Okay, yeah. What are you going to do? It's either way. So, I've got First Continental Congress. It's a response to the Intolerable Acts. We send a list of complaints to King George, and then he says no, right? So we boycott trade with England until they repeal the laws. Obviously, this gained support from all 13 colonies, and it called for a second Continental Congress the following May. All right? So, if you skip down to number 10, it says on April 19th, 1775. Y'all know what happened in 1775?
Wait, do you want us to put down gaining support of all 13 colonies?
Nope.
No, that's not it.
I just want you to know we've boycotted trade with England. That's the last thing you should have. So, that was the last straw for England. When we said we weren't going to trade anymore, they're like, that's fine. And then Titus is right. That's when the shot around the world was heard. So, on April 19th, and this is number 10, put down that the revolution begins. Does anybody know where the revolution started? The Revolutionary War? Good. So, just put down Lexington and Concord. So you have the battles of Lexington and Concord. Now, at this point in time, when the battles of Lexington and Concord happened, did we have a Continental Army?
Yeah, we did.
Not at this point in time. We had little state militias running around everybody. Be like Carroll County trying to fight Russia or something. You know what I'm saying? I think we'd give them a pretty decent fight. But anyway, that's irrelevant. What I'm saying is there's no organization to what we have militarily. We don't have a military. We have, like I said, little militias that try to protect their towns and things of that nature, which is good, okay? So, in number 11, after the revolution has already started, on May 10th, 1775, if you'll notice on the smart board, we've got the Second Continental Congress. So jot down the Second Continental Congress.
Is that still number 10?
This is number 11. It's the first time I've ever tried it this way.
Usually you write this much.
Yeah, usually you're writing everything, Titus.
Usually you write.
Oh, I'm writing, don't bother me. It's just like,
I figured typing it would be a little bit easier. So, we have the Second Continental Congress. This happens in Philadelphia, just like the first one. I don't think I told you that. But it happened in Philadelphia. And again, guys, it's just delegates coming together to try to solve a problem about what we're going to do with Great Britain. So, it says every colony sends delegates. If you notice, when we had the Stamp Act, only 9 of the 13 came, right? Now that we fast forwarded a little bit, all the colonists are showing, all the colonies are sending somebody. We're united against what what the Crown's trying to do. It says John Hancock was chosen president. I don't really need you to know that part. You've already written down that the battles of Lexington and Concord had already begun. So what basically did we do at the Second Continental Congress? That's the biggest thing, and it's at the bottom of that page. Put down that we created a Continental Army. At the Second Continental Congress, we created a Continental Army. And you guys should already know who's basically running that, and that was George Washington. He was chosen as the general, right? Right? All right, we can skip number 12. Actually, let's not do anything yet. Yeah, I literally forgot the most important part of the Second Continental Congress. Also, underneath the Second Continental Congress, not only do you need to know that we created a Continental Army, but you also need to know that we get our first national government. So jot down first national government. Now see how much you guys have paid attention in the past.
What was the second one you said?
First national government. We create our first national government at the Second Continental Congress. We've only had 2 forms of government in America. One that we create here, and the second one is called the U.S. Constitution. Does anybody have any clue what our first form of government was called? Put down the Articles of what? Confederation. The Articles of Confederation. And again, we're still in number 11 here.
That was the first national government?
Yes, so when I ask you what was our first form of national government, you would tell me what?
Articles of Confederation.
The Articles of Confederation. So let's get a little in depth about what the Articles done. I mean, very, 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 very small here, okay? Basically, it had legislative and executive powers. During the war, it raised the military, printed, borrowed money, and made foreign treaties. And Ben Franklin was a leading member. So now, here's Ben Franklin again. What did he come up with earlier in this? What was that plan he had? The Albany Plan, right? And in 1754, he urged the colonies to do what? He wanted them to create a Congress, to build a military, to regulate trade, and to figure out how to deal with Native Americans, right? Yeah. And they told him no, that they weren't going to do that. Now we fast forward 21 years, and what have we just done? We created a government to build a military, to help regulate trade, and figure out how to deal with foreign countries.
Yeah.
They literally done it. It just took them 21 years. So Ben Franklin's ideas were great. He was just ahead of his time. Nobody wanted to hear him at the time he wanted to give them. Okay? So, we now can skip number 12 and we can skip number 13 because those are irrelevant to what we're trying to accomplish. All right? In number 14, every one of you should know what's happening there. On July 4th, 1776, what have we got here? The Declaration of what? Independence is adopted. So put down the Declaration of Independence. Now, we need to add a little bit to the Declaration of Independence idea, okay? Yes, we all know that we get to eat hot dogs and cook out and have a good time on July the 4th. But a lot of people to this day really don't know what the Declaration of Independence did, other than freed us from controlling Great Britain, right? What do you think, when people think of the Declaration of Independence, they think of it as a letter written to the king saying, we're no longer part of you, we no longer have any ties to you, right? But in fact, the Declaration of Independence, guys, is yet another list of complaints. And I would jot that down. It's a list of complaints and why we are leaving and having nothing to do with the crown anymore. Okay? It was a list of complaints. Okay? And obviously, it got rid of any type of ties that we have to England. Okay? It says the Declaration severed ties with Great Britain and created a unique nation. It says no political system had ever been formed on the principles of equality, human rights, and a representative government that gave or got all of its authority from the will of the people. So what we need to put down underneath Declaration of Independence is it was based on 3 principles. So jot down where it says principles of equality, human rights, and a representative government. Y'all see that on the board? We had just formed a government that its basic principles were equality, human rights, which are your liberties or your freedoms, and a representative government. Okay? And the biggest thing is, where's all the power coming from? The power of this government is coming from where? From the people. All right. Now, we've got to the bottom here. Number 15 says March 1st, 1781. And that's when we're going to just simply put down the Articles of Confederation go into effect. That form of government that we had just made goes into effect. So in 1781, we fall under the Articles of Confederation. Okay? Now, the rest of this chapter, or the rest of this section, starts talking about state constitutions. I'm going to go through those with you, but here's something I need you to keep in mind as we talk about state constitutions. Under the Articles of Confederation, you guys have got to realize that this government was set up in a completely different form and fashion than anything Britain or England had had. You guys with me? We wanted a government that was completely different than what we had to deal with when we were under their control. So the Articles has flaws. Okay? The biggest flaw that the Articles had was that it gave more power to state governments than it did to the national government. So that would be like in today's time, Virginia telling the federal government we're not going to do something because you can't make us. You guys understand that? Really weird way of thinking, but you got to remember, the people that set this government up, they're just like you and me. They didn't want anything to do with how England had their structure. Now, yeah, we have some similarities, but it's completely different in how we do things. Okay? So, after the Revolutionary War happens and we're finally broken away and we're basically on our own now, the 13 colonies decide to set up state constitutions. It says Congress urged colonies to write their own constitutions. Okay? Now, somewhere on that paper, whether you want to type it or you want to write it, I don't have state constitutions written down for you as far as write or for any type of notes. So this is all going to have to be on you. Okay?
So, like, do you want it like a date and time? And
No, I want you to write down state constitutions, and we're going to put some stuff underneath it that I'm going to need you to know for quiz and test purposes. Okay? I didn't give you that option on the handout.
Create space on that.
If you can create space, do that, or if you need to jot it down, do that. Either way, I'm fine with it. You just need to know where it's at. Everybody with me? So, it says Congress urged the colonies to write their own constitutions. Now, why do they want them to write their own constitutions? If you'll notice that second bullet point on the board, says a constitution sets the principles, structure, and process of government. So underneath that, I would like for you to put that the state constitutions set the principle, structure, and the process of government.
State Constitution 1.
Sets the principles, structures, and process of government, of how each state is going to run things. It's going to write down what each principles of the state has, the structure of the government they're going to have in their state government, and the process of how they're going to conduct business within their government. Does that make sense? And then, guys, most of it says that most states adopt constitutions in 76 and 77. This isn't a bad idea, okay? Now, in these state constitutions, they wanted 5 things listed. You guys with me? I'm not going to define all those. We're just going to jot down what they are. Y'all with me? I need you to know those things in red. That they wanted each state constitution to have these 5 characteristics. And again, you don't have to define them on your paper. I'm going to tell you what they are. But I do need you to remember them in a list. Okay? The first thing they want is popular sovereignty. Now, you guys have already learned what sovereignty is. And sovereignty means what?
Power.
Who has absolute power, right? According to the state constitutions, it says popular sovereignty. Popular is just another way of saying population. Y'all got that? So who are they saying has the power in the state?
The population.
The people, right? The people. Okay? That the government gets its power only if it's granted by the people. Okay? The second characteristic of a state constitution you have seen before. It's a limited government. What do you think I mean by a limited government? If you are limited, can you do everything you want to do? No. They are confined to what the people allow them to do. Y'all got that? Thirdly, all citizens are entitled to civil liberties or rights. The book says that the states included a Bill of Rights defining basic freedoms, such as your freedom of speech, press, assembly, petition. Okay? Do we still have that? Yeah, we do. The fourth thing is separation of powers. And what that means is that no branch has more power than the other one, that each branch in each state constitution would be limited to what the other 2 branches can make them do. So you have separation of power. And then lastly, you have a system of checks and balances, where each branch can check on the other one to make sure they are not violating anything in the Constitution. Okay? At some point in the next few days, you will have a quiz on section 1 and 2 from this chapter. Y'all with me? One of those questions will have name the 5 characteristics of a state constitution, which would be popular sovereignty, limited government, civil liberties, separation of power, and then lastly, checks and balances. Does anybody have any questions about what we just did? We good there? Okay. You all, I put that quiz in your classroom. It says Chapter 2, Section 2, I guess quiz. If you want to go ahead and do that now or work on it now in class, I would go ahead and say go for it. That way you can have it done and you can have it submitted back to me. And you don't have to worry about it tomorrow because you'll be done for tomorrow for my class. You'll be just worried about what's coming Thursday. Has everybody got me? So go ahead and try to answer those questions, and we'll go from there. All right?
I have a question for you whenever you get done recording.
What's up? It's paused.
Let's just pause.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like lost in the last